out of one meeting into another meeting all day. Actually, from a few days now, not just.
At some point, Emma's going to make it so that you can do everything simultaneously.
Like my sleep is also a meeting.
Okay, where's this introduction? So Shriram is interested. He's coming.
Yeah, so Hansika ma'am is online.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
I'll put a video on.
So,
hello, Dr. Hansika.
Hi. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Okay.
I'm Sarala. Even though it says Kartika C, I'm Sarala.
Hi, Sarala. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Bhavani, nice to meet you.
Hi, Professor Rao.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. We've been following your work with a lot of interest here at Africa, because it's very close to what we do and what we feel passionate about, and so
that's lovely.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for agreeing to talk to the students.
Oh no, absolutely. I try and make sure that time is made to converse with students, because I find the work that's going on even at Amrita right now very, very exciting, very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
And so just if you can tell me just a little bit more about your organizers. I wanted to meet with you like 10 minutes before, just because we've never met before and we've never talked to each other. So at least to get a little bit know you, and maybe if we have the time, I can also tell you about a little bit what's going on over here. But you're working for an organization. It's not an academic institution, but it's like an NGO.
Right. So we're our legal status is that we're not-for-profit organization. So we're a Section 8 company, and basically we are an academic research organization, just that we aren't governed by the UGC or don't have any official university status. But a lot of the things that we do is driven by our own interest and passion for the kinds of research areas, topics that we do. So Monk Prayogshala was established in 2013 in terms of operations, and I started out establishing the Department of Psychology primarily because our mission is to advance academic research in India, and psychology and more broadly the social sciences is a space where there is a lot of work that is put out by Indian origin scientists, but not necessarily by researchers who are still rooted in India and understanding the cultural context therein. So thereafter, the Department of Economics started in 2014. Around 2017, there was the Department of Sociology, and most recently, we've started branching out in the Department of Political Science. And I mean, these disciplines are only in name. If you have gone over my profile, we do a lot of interdisciplinary work, and we value and cherish moving across boundaries of, well, disciplines per se. What we do is three primary activities. One is the hardcore academic research. So making sure that through experiments, through surveys, through very, very good research designs, we collect the data, we publish in journals, we publish in books, we write books and things like that. So we make sure that the hardcore academic research is done. We also do capacity building. So do trainings and workshops with students, postdocs, PhD scholars, professors to really build skills in research, and which is a continuing training gap in India. And what we do every year is something called the annual research summer school, which is a week-long program we're in our 6th year now. So that's coming up at the end of May, start of June, where we invite students, professors, anyone who wants to really learn the ABCs to like writing a proposal, figuring out how to become a researcher in India in the social science space. And the third thing that we do is fundraising. So we do go for the more traditional grant writing route and raise funds therein, but we also do a lot of collaborations with NGOs or other academic partners. Say we've worked with Magic Bus, we work with CRY, because what we do is offer a third-party perspective on their monitoring and evaluation of their program intervention. So even if they do have an internal M&E team, it's always good to have kind of like a third-party audit, so to speak, to bring more credence to their program impact as well as their assessment. So that's in a nutshell, that's what Prayogshala does.
So, but do you do also implementation? If you're doing fundraising, you also do the implementation of those projects, or
Yes.
is that in partnership with somebody else, or you kind of drive the implementation also?
No, absolutely. So we know that we can't we do skill sets required for implementing projects, for instance. So we have worked with, say, I remember the Department of Economics had raised a grant from 3IE in 2018. I remember that was on sanitation and building toilet infrastructure and misuse of, say, that infrastructure. And because we're the researchers, we have no idea what's happening on the ground in rural Orissa, for instance. So we did partner with an NGO there called Gram Vikas to help us and handhold us in terms of trying to figure out what the ground realities are, try and do like focus group interviews, focus group discussions, in-depth interviews. So we do collaborate extensively both within and outside of India, because comparative advantage. We know how to do the research and probably write the grants, but we may not have as much capacity to implement the project.
Okay, wonderful. Sounds like an ideal situation, if you ask me. We pretty much do very similar, except that we have all the strings attached with UGC and NAC and the entire bureaucratic shebang that goes along with it. So we're like a full-fledged academic institution, but we're very closely affiliated to our parent organization, which is the MAMUT, which is an NGO. And so they have huge ground level projects. And so a lot of the mandate with Amrita is that all research is for societal benefit.
Absolutely,
And
100%.
so it's cross-cutting, not just with social sciences. And so we work very closely with our engineering department. That's why kind of reflected on the backdrop also. So we're very strong on technology, on the robotics and virtual reality and artificial intelligence, at the same time also with the social sciences. So we kind of always go hand in hand between different disciplines. And I think the student group that you're talking to today is also very diverse. I don't know if they sent you a write-up of the profile of the class. Has that been sent? Did we send Hansika ma'am the write-up of the class? I can just give you a brief overview if they have not sent it. There are about 50 plus students. Right now, they're all across the world. Some of them are in Brazil and in the US and all the way to Malaysia on the eastern side. They come from various backgrounds. There are people from engineering, from social sciences, from management, all the different disciplines that you could think of. They're all doing their PhD in sustainable development. So they're all working on different issues, and the university works in 101 villages across India and 21 states. And we've been actually working in those villages for over 5 years right now. And the way the institution is set up is that we have a program called Live in Labs, where every student spends some time in the village. It's mandatory. It's part of their coursework. It's and along with them, of course, the faculty also. So our department primarily looks into two different things. One is skill development, vocational and soft skills. So we focus a lot on skill development. And second is women empowerment. So we work with women. So these are the two areas. And we work very closely with the capacity building. So even if there is a project that is on the technical side, we try to work with them in terms of capacity building with the community around that technology. Because if you don't have that, then any technology will fail. So any intervention will fail. So that's really our focus area. And but I happen to be the one that was picked out to teach the students a culture class. So on Indian culture. And so I was trying to expose them to Indian culture and how much culture impacts the kind of work that we do. And like I said, we've been working with the toilets and sanitation for the last 5 years right now. And so we've varied experiences from all across the country. Each place offers its own experience on sanitation to us, and we've learned so many lessons working. And we were trying, the whole effort was to train women who are primarily uh, uh, farm labor. They were basically daily wage labor in farms, to train them on masonry and toilet plastering and plumbing, and teaching them those trades, and taught them to build toilets in their villages. First, they build the toilets in their own houses as a self-help group in their houses, and then they take on contracts for other, and linked it to the Swachh Bharat mission.
Right.
To this thing, and went through the whole process of getting the villages up to the open defecation certification. And now we want to work with the women on the Jal Jeevan scheme. How do we get clean drinking water for them? So that's the kind of approach that we've taken. So yeah, so this group is not entirely related to our lab. It's they're from part of the class that I'm teaching. So there are some that are specifically who are working with me and with our lab on the different projects that we have. But there are others who are doing some very interesting work in very different disciplines. And so that's the audience that we have here today. And I'm sure they're going to ask you a million questions. We have very interesting discussions about Indian culture, and it's actually a very fun group to be hanging out with. I don't know what a better word. So sorry, we're about time to start. I'm just going to give a formal introduction of you to the entire lab. Or what do you want to, Sarla? Do you want to do it, or would you like me to do it as you prefer?
Like you to do it. I would like you to do it. But the one thing I want to say is that she was featured in Women in Science calendar, India calendar last year in 2020.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's do you want to, so now you can introduce.
Okay. I'm just going to, I have it written down. I don't want to wing it, so just give me a second while I pull it out. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. And I would love to introduce you to our very special speaker here with us today. And her name is Dr. Hansikal Kapoor. I think we've sent you a lot of messages and flyers about her and her accomplishments. And sorry, one second. Just going to pull up my document. Just give me a minute. Oops. Sarala, I just need you to send me a link to the document again. I'm sorry, I'm not able to pull it up.
Okay.
Going to the wrong area.
Well, I can introduce.
Okay, so yes, please, thank you.
Do that, and you can always add whatever you want.
Yeah.
I just have to get this thing off of this. Okay, so it is with great pleasure that I introduce our speaker today. Her name is Dr. Hansika Kapoor, and she is a research author at the Department of Psychology at the Monk Prayogashala in Mumbai. She also completed her PhD from IIT in Bombay in the area of creativity. So she was a Fulbright scholar for postdoctoral work in the US at the University of Connecticut. And her work has been published in several international peer-reviewed academic journals, such as Creative Research Journal, Thinking, Skills and Creativity, and Personality and Individual Differences. And she regularly contributes to popular media publications. And she has been cited as a subject matter expert in numerous features on social and cognitive psychology in the Indian context. She's also a practicing psychologist and a passionate researcher, and she has taught core research principles, software, and operations to students across the country. Okay, I think that's sufficient. There's so many things I can say about her. Actually, the more I look, the more it broad it is. Not like, but you know, there's threads. I don't know how to say it, but she does a lot. She does a lot, and she's extremely creative about it. And I cannot wait to hear what she has to say. Thank you.
And they have the students have gone through some of your papers, Dr. Hansika. We shared a couple of your papers with the students, and they have gone through some of your papers. So yeah, they're all excited.
Fantastic.
Hearing
Awesome.
from you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm just going to try and share my screen. I hope that's visible. All right, great. So we're gonna have about a 25 to 30-minute me talking, and then I would love to know what your questions, etc., comments are, because I do hear that you're a wonderful, obviously, group of individuals, group of students who have wonderful research ideas, and I'm really looking forward to interacting with you. So we're going to open for questions in about 25 to 30 minutes, but drop in questions whenever you want in the chat. I don't mind pausing my presentation, which is not terribly long, and trying to have a conversation as we go forward. The talk today is going to be centered around applying socio-moral principles to behavior change in India. And when Professor Rao reached out to me, she cited my paper with my colleague Anirudh Taggart on sacred nudging and sanitation decisions in India. And I wanted to actually give you a broader perspective of, well, kind of contextualize that paper in our in the overall understanding of how we approach research as well as behavior change in India. So what I am going to introduce you to today are a couple of theories, a couple of models, along with, of course, several examples from my own work, as well as work that I have been inspired by or have followed to kind of contextualize how we can achieve sustainable behavior change in the Indian context, which is it's fairly different as compared to other contexts in a land where language and food changes every 100 kilometers. It, of course, is very, very important to contextualize an intervention. And what we're going to be focusing on today, or what my talk is going to center on, is what these socio-moral principles could be. So to begin, and this, I'm going to connect this to the sacred nudging paper as well, in case any of you have gone through it. There is the theory that a lot of my current work, actually, not a lot of my past work, but a lot of my current work is based on is something called the moral foundations theory. Which was proposed in, which had its nascent steps in 2004 by a moral philosopher, moral psychologist named Jonathan Haidt and his colleague Jesse Graham. And they conceptualized these 5, now updated to 6, but let's stick with 5, universal moral principles that regardless of culture, regardless of country, everybody adheres at some level to these 5 universal moral foundations, these moral pillars. And the difference between ethics and morality is also really interesting, because ethics is what is dictated by broader societal concerns, whereas morality is more intrinsic to the individual. And the way I would like to kind of describe these 5 moral foundations is through the example of COVID, honestly, not just COVID, but through the example of COVID vaccination, and about whether an individual decides to take up a COVID vaccine or not, which is another research project that we're undertaking. So there are these 5 moral foundations, and 2 of them, harm and fairness, so it's harm/care, so care and fairness, are called individualizing. They focus more on individual rights, they focus more on personal rights, and they are more central to people who come from individualistic societies where you put yourself above the other person. The other three, loyalty, authority, and purity, are termed as binding foundations, and those are more pertinent to collectivistic nations, collectivistic societies, and on the whole, cultures that adhere to more societal orientation, putting them before me, that kind of thing. And in the context of, say, COVID vaccine hesitancy, COVID vaccine behavior change, for instance, think about it like this. What is harm? Am I going to get think about a survey. I will get an adverse reaction if I take the COVID vaccine. That's harm. That's feeding into the harm foundation to understand whether you are going to either harm yourself, or if the item is framed as if when my family member takes the COVID vaccine, they will receive an adverse effect, adverse reaction. So harm and care as a foundation pertains to hurt, pertains to damage, pertains to destruction. And from a moral lens, how protective are we of not letting that happen, both individually and as a society? Fairness. I will only take a vaccine when it is available for everyone. Fairness pertains to justice. Fairness pertains to equality. It pertains to everyone having an equal and fair chance at doing something or achieving something, etc. And that is, and you can understand where that comes from when I'm saying that these are individualizing foundations. These are foundations that are rooted within individual behavior change. So that's care and fairness. Both of those are individualizing. And coming to the binding ones, there's loyalty. There's loyalty, which is loyalty / in-group. And the way it's conceptualized within the model foundations literature is loyalty actually to one's own country. So a question in the COVID context could be like, I'm only going to take the Bharat biotech vaccination because it's made in India. That's loyalty. That's you aligning with your national pride in a moralistic manner, and therefore not allowing the outgroup, whatever the outgroup is, say Pfizer, Moderna, which are not even available in India, but not allowing another kind of external vaccination in this case to override your choice. Then we come to authority. Authority is the extent to which you subscribe to hierarchical norms, institutions that I'm never going to disrespect my elders. I'm never going to disrespect my parents. I'm never going to talk back to them, etc. So those are authority-based model foundations. And in the COVID context, it can also be I will only take a vaccine if my country's leader takes a vaccination. And therefore, I will follow in their footsteps, for instance. And then finally, there's sanctity. Sanctity and purity are foundations that, of course, feed into this notion of sacred nudging as well, which I'm going to get into. But in the vaccination context, a lot of vaccine hesitancy, at least in the West, and maybe even here, I mean, we're collecting data on it, let's see whether it pans out, is perceptions about vaccinations containing material that is impure for me to ingest into my own body. And therefore, I'm not going to choose to take a vaccination, for instance. So there's harm and fairness, care and fairness, and then there's loyalty, authority, and purity. And once you acquaint yourself with these 5 model foundations, the way I have applied it to, say, COVID vaccination context, there are multiple areas of sustainability and basically the SDGs that can be applied to. Think about menstrual health, think about access to education, or just all the wash areas, water and sanitation, hygiene, etc. All of these draw from certain kinds of, or behaviors related to them may draw from certain kinds of adherence to these moral foundations. And because we're still talking about purity and sanctity, etc., the paper that I wrote with my colleague Anirudh, who is an economist, by the way, which is why it's sacred nudging. Nudging is a part of choice architecture that we kind of picked up, and the sacred part came from these understandings of purity and making sure that areas are clean, and the opposite of purity is disgust, etc., etc. So the paper that we wrote, published in India Review in 2018, actually focused on using socio-cultural religious motifs like this, which are painted on walls that you can see in any neighborhood, honestly, in the country, that are meant to prevent defacement, that are meant to prevent public urination, that are meant to prevent open defecation and things like that. However, this hasn't been studied in a formalized context. We haven't really done an experiment to check whether this works as a good deterrent, owing to motifs that are related to religiosity, that are related to purity and sanctity, and therefore serve as a nudge away from engaging in public defacement of walls and areas, and therefore reducing open defecation. The paper that we also wrote, obviously, we looked up a lot of data on current OD trends, current sanitation requirements, etc. And this draws from the same idea that we had, that yes, building toilets is great, but how are you going to make them used? How are you going to make sure that individuals change their fundamental principles that are associated with purity, that are associated with caste-based norms, that are associated with caste-based hierarchies that may prevent the use of such latrine facilities? So it's built, that's a great metric. How often is it being used? And we thought, at least from a theoretical lens, that making these purity norms, making these connections to sanctity in the form of religious and socio-cultural motifs may actually be a good deterrent, and probably a low-cost deterrent as well, to prevent open defecation and public urination. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten funding to really study this in an experimental way, but definitely it's a theoretical idea, and it at least tied and contextualized OD behavior and the reduction of OD behavior within this context. We also acknowledge that a lot of OD that does happen may happen in rural areas, that may happen in fields where there aren't any walls to paint things on, etc. But we did also recommend, say, drawing rangoli, putting vermilion as a deterrent, making some kind of scarecrow type of mounting apparatus to deter this kind of behavior. And of course, considering the socio-cultural sensitivities of the context within which something like this could be implemented. Moving on to another theory that is very, very important when we are trying to contextualize behavior change within India is our cultural dimension. So the moral foundations, I think, once you do read up a little bit more about it, you'll also see that, oh yes, it may apply to so many other areas and contexts, and this is how it can be applied and things like that. And similarly, in the case of cultural dimensions, there are, and this is supposed to be universal as well. This was proposed by a researcher, cultural psychologist, the father of cultural psychology, honestly, Gate Hofstede, in 1984, who had done, I think, a worldwide survey of IBM employees to try to understand what their cultural orientations were like, etc., and came up with these 6 binaries, so to speak. Now, this is, of course, moves across various countries, as do the moral foundations. However, within the Indian context, they also obviously apply differently. So the first one is power distance. A power distance index is basically the extent to which an individual within a certain cultural setup accepts and expects power to be distributed unequally. So in countries that are high on power distance, such as India, we accept and expect that power is going to be distributed unequally, that there are going to be few people at the top in power, and the rest of the pyramid is going to be wider, for instance, as compared to a country like the US, where the power distance is relatively smaller, so to speak. Individualism and collectivism is, of course, it's the most commonly used as well as abused in a sense, because all of these cultural dimensions, yes, they may pertain to countries at a large aggregate level. However, they also pertain to individuals. So I could be sitting in a collectivistic nation like India, but be really individualistic. And therefore it's really important to remember to take personal orientations into account whilst using cultural orientations. But individualism and collectivism are pertaining to, as I said, putting myself over others or putting others over myself. South Asian countries are more likely to be collectivistic as compared to weird nations, so Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Uncertainty avoidance is the extent to which an individual or a culture is comfortable with tolerating ambiguity. So am I okay with not knowing what's going to happen? Am I okay with not knowing what next, etc.? And as I'm describing this, you may think that, oh yeah, this makes sense, because there would be different cultures that respond differently to, say, COVID lockdown strategies. Because if communication was not clear by central authorities, etc., in certain countries who are very high on uncertainty avoidance, that would have led to real chaos within that country. Masculinity and femininity is associated with masculinity is associated with the task orientation, making sure that competition or being competitive is valued, or making sure that deadlines are met, tasks are met, etc. Whereas feminine cultures are more likely to be person-oriented and more cooperative. A country or an individual who has a long-term orientation is more likely to invest for the future, curtail their current, say, even expenditure, as compared to a short-term orientation that is associated with not really caring about what's going to happen in the future. And similarly with indulgence and restraint, the best example for this is how Indians save money. We're taught how to save money, or we're asked to save money from a very young age. We're inculcated with that financial, just sense of making sure that you have a little pool of money that you keep aside for a rainy day, whereas Americans are not. And it's really interesting to see that change in behavior as a result of being a restrained society versus an indulgent society. I'm going to spend on myself right now, etc. And as you can understand, it obviously changes based on where you are, even within a country like India, so metropolitan, rural areas, etc. This is a comparison from the Hofstede Insights website. That's a free space to use and compare all of these things. But this is just basically a snapshot of different countries, different comparisons. So for instance, the United States is a very, very individualistic country. Whereas China is very, very collectivistic. India is somewhere in the middle right now. Whereas in terms of long-term orientation, China is much, much more long-term oriented as compared to the US. So this is a nice kind of data set that you can use for free to contextualize results if you are doing research across different countries. And even within India, if you want to contextualize your findings on the basis of the cultural dimensions, this is a good go-to to try and understand where India is in relation to other nations. 50 is the midpoint. And finally, we have something called tightness versus looseness. And this draws into conversations about social norms. And tight cultures, restrained cultures, for instance, have a lot of social norms. They are very publicly available. They are very publicly communicated. That, say, in Indian society, there is a publicly communicated as well as an implicit norm that if you enter, if you are married, divorce is frowned upon. It is a social norm that has been communicated, explicitly, implicitly, whatever it is, as a result of which the ability of a woman or a man in an unhappy marriage, for instance, it's very difficult for them to be able to change their behavior in that setting. So a tight culture is one where there are clear guidelines about what you're supposed to do in certain contexts, what you're supposed to not do in certain contexts, what you're supposed to wear at a wedding, what you're not supposed to wear at a wedding, what you're supposed to wear at a funeral, what you're not supposed to wear at a funeral, etc., etc. Loose cultures are those where norms are not that salient, norms are not that important, norms are not that well framed. So it's okay. I mean, you don't have to. Sure, we would prefer if you did, but you won't get penalized if you don't. And in the COVID context, it's easy to understand this because there are social norms associated with mask wearing, washing hands, keeping 6 feet distance, and those norms, even though India is a tight society, those norms may not have been solidified to the extent that they should, primarily because of space constraints, to be completely honest. But there was a tweet by, I live in Mumbai, by the way, and there was a tweet by the Mumbai police, who I absolutely love their social media game. They have hilarious tweets. They had actually put down a tweet saying, not wearing a seatbelt, fine rupees 500. Not wearing a helmet, fine rupees 500. Not wearing a mask, fine rupees 200. Please make sure that you are aware of all of these things. And that to me was really interesting because the reference group that you gave us, I mean, the reference amount that you gave us was much higher for not wearing a seatbelt and not wearing a helmet. Whereas for a mask, it was just 200. They've not really normalized it. They've not really made it at par with other traffic, say, violations, etc. Which was interesting because when you're communicating social norms or when you're communicating penalties if you do not meet a norm, making sure that they are consistent is also very, very important to ensure compliance of behavior change. There was another project that I was doing with a collaborator from Sweden who was working on meta norms. So the ways in which we in different countries think about certain norm-based activities. So how often do you wash your hands? Is it before a meal, after a meal, before shaking hands with someone else? And as you can understand, all of these sound really dated now in COVID times, but it was an interesting study in the context of no virus. And an interesting one was, question was, would you allow a pedestrian to cross the road? Would you wait? If you're driving a vehicle, would you wait to allow a pedestrian to cross the road? And people from India were like, no, obviously not. I mean, can like, the signal has gone, I have to rush, as compared to people in Western nations where you could get fined if you didn't do that. So norms across cultures, norms across contexts are very, very different. And I think as a behavioral researcher, as a behavioral scientist, it's so very important to understand where those changes come from. How are we as a populace so different when we respond to similar situations that we are all collectively put in. Why is it that certain people's risk preferences during COVID times are much, much higher as compared to others? What about time preferences that, oh no, if I get COVID, if I get it, then I'll see, versus no, I shouldn't get it at all, etc. So I think it's really, really important to take into account, say, moral foundations, cultural dimensions, tightness, looseness of cultures, even if we are not doing cross-cultural examinations, but even if we want to understand better the behaviors that we are trying to change or that we are trying to influence within India itself. That's what I had. And I'm very, very happy to take on questions.
Thank you so much for that very interesting talk. It's so interesting. I was actually going to ask. I had come across this Hofstede's cultural evaluation of countries that while I was preparing the syllabus, and I was thinking, oh, I must get somebody who understands this to talk about it, and then you spoke about it. That's actually very interesting. Although somebody had told me once that it's not as popular right now, and it hasn't been used in quite some time, and I'm not quite so sure how popular it is. I was also hoping that you could touch upon your work in rural India, if you would say.
Sure. So there have been a couple of projects that we have done in that context. One was, as I said, the 3IE grant that we had received um, to help people not just build latrines, because that under the SBM that was already happening, that was already mandated within villages. However, it was more of a behavioral challenge to get people to use those latrines, and the name of our project was Toilet Champions. So what we did, and although only the pilot phase actually got funded, the full intervention did not. But in the pilot, what we did is we spoke with nodal individuals within a village, whether that is the sarpanch, whether that is the head of a prominent SHG within the village, etc. And we asked them to kind of become a spokesperson for why that toilet needs to be used, or why toilets in general need to be used apart from just building them. And they were designated toilet champions. And what we wanted to try and understand is, one, whether they would do it, and two, whether there would be any significant behavioral change in the use of those latrines once they started communicating in this fashion with other individuals within the village. So at the pilot stage, what we had done is identified toilet champions. We had done a few FGDs, we had done a few interviews, and everybody really did seem very, very happy with the idea of having someone from the community itself championing the use of this latrine, because it made even more sense because of, say, as I said, caste-based norms, wherein at least within the religion of Hinduism, there are norms related to who is supposed to, at least in rural areas, maybe even urban, who is supposed to clean, say, toilets. That is relegated to the lower caste, etc. And therefore, because we spoke to the sarpanch, or because we spoke to the leader of an SHG, or because we spoke to women there, they naturally belonged to upper castes, and they were upper caste individuals who then were able to have better clout in facilitating behavior change amongst not just lower caste individuals within the village, but regardless of it, caste agnostic in a sense, where everybody started listening to what those individuals had to say. So that was one project. Another one we had done in rural Tamil Nadu, which was a little more experimental in nature. We received a grant from the Partnership for Economic Policy, and in 2017 we had run kind of a lab and field experiment where we went to 2 villages in Tamil Nadu to run an experiment on intra-household bargaining behavior. So we recruited 231 married couples and had the husband and the wife come into the experiment room, which was actually just a classroom in the school, and take certain buying decisions to try and understand whether and how intra-household dynamics actually played out. So that was less. That was actually based on trying to understand whether participation in Narega by women, because participating in Narega gives you your own bank account, you have your own income, etc., and that is not shared with your husband, for instance. We wanted to know whether that would empower women who are participating in Narega, whether they would be more empowered to put forth their ideas, opinions in terms of a decision in terms of a buying decision for the household. We did not find a significant effect. However, there was other information. I think we're still trying to publish that paper. It's been about 4 years now, but that was more experimental actually, more than. But we did have a policy meeting with individuals with government stakeholders from the Tamil Nadu government to try and give them this insight, give them this information, because recruitment in Narega is also cyclical. You get recruited for 100 days in a year, and sometimes in, say, the monsoon or in the winter, you do have to look for alternate sources of employment. So we actually did have a policy brief where we did tell government stakeholders saying, why don't you try to time these recruitment drives a little better for the benefit of women who could get recruited and therefore have more say in their household intra-household decisions.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have so many stories that we should, I think at some point of time, I think we should just touch base with our lab and the work that we do. We'll have a very interesting story swapping session, I'm sure, between us. But I'll allow the participants to, we have hands up already. So there are some people who are putting it on the chat, and I would just say, in the order in which you're putting your hands up, please ask your questions. So Eston, so you could go first, and then Ishwar Prasad, you can go next.
Okay, good afternoon, Dr. I don't know if it's Kapoor. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Yeah, I'm Eston from Zambia. My question is on the norms. I don't know, because we have different norms, and I know these norms are inclined to religion. Now, yeah, like dominantly us in Zambia, the common religion is Christianity. So I know you are a behavioral scientist. How have you assessed as maybe the Hindu culture and norms and the Christian culture and their norms, and then look at how can they easily blend, so that you can advise some of us who are Christians to see how we can bring in between the two norms and then blend in, because the fact that is we are going into the villages, and in these villages, I know the common religion is Hindu. Then there are some things or some norms which will be very much new to me, such that I might react in a different way, then maybe the others will not understand me. So maybe your advice in those lines. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Eston. From what I understood, I think You specifically asked about how, I mean, because I've been talking about, say, context within Hinduism as a dominant religion in India, what can be done in terms of, say, minority religions, or obviously religions that are dominant in other countries such as Christianity. The good thing about the model foundations, say, theory is that this is pan religion actually. So there would be behaviors, that there would be norms that are pertaining to purity even in Christianity, and I think it's therefore an important base upon which you can build these kinds of norms, because these kinds of behavior change, say, principles, particularly because you can strategically use specific dominant religious iconography to nudge people to keep spaces clean, for instance. Now, India is a multicultural, multi-religious country, as a result of which it can get really complicated here. However, in a country that has, say, 99% of a dominant religion, it would be actually easier to kind of implement or kind of adapt an intervention to be in line with the dominant religion, as compared to a place like India, where you have to be obviously extremely sensitive to people from all walks of life. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a Hindu thing or a Christian thing or a Muslim thing or something like that. I would say that these moral pillars are actually agnostic. These moral pillars exist in every human being, regardless of their religious standings, regardless of their socio-cultural backgrounds. It is the extent to which you can capitalize on creating interventions using one of these moral pillars that may differ. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much. I've understood, bearing in mind that you have also touched on the moral pillars. And okay, I know some of these moral pillars, they also, in fact, all of them, they also pertain to Christianity.
Yes,
so
yes,
I think
exactly.
it helps. The way you have explained, it helps to me now. It's just about balancing the two.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from your explanation. Okay, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. I see Siva Prasad has written, would be great if you can share what you think about the potential of nudge-type behavioral interventions in the Indian context and the possibility of integrating the same into policy.
Yeah, this is Siva Prasad. I just wanted to give you the context. I'm doing a PhD in the center, and my area of research is the role of nudging and the potential of nudging in promoting pro-environmental behavior. So thank you very much for your talk, and I'm super excited that I'm getting a chance to listen directly from you and ask a question to you. So this question is basically from the paper Sacred Nudging that you have written in 2018. Two key takeaway from the practical side was, first one is nudge type behavioral interventions are low cost and highly scalable. First one, and the second one is there is a huge potential for sacred nudging in particular for adopting as a policy tool. So would like to know more about from you, what you think about such potential in Indian context right now, especially the unique cultural context that we have. It's clearly distinct from the West. Bulk of the evidence that we have with regards to nudge and behavioral intervention, even we have the nudge behavioral toolkit in the West. They're using it as part of administration for governance as well. So curious to know what you think about this. You have also written about the impact or the influence of moral values in making decisions. So you've gone so deep into it. It would be great if you can share your thoughts on what you think the possibilities it has, a nudge as a tool has?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I actually forgot to mention one of our other projects that we did as part of trying to set up a nudge unit for the government of Maharashtra, where this was conducted in Mumbai. It was a pilot study. It was conducted in Mumbai, where we wanted to promote plastic segregation and recycling, because in the city recently there has been obviously norms and laws pertaining to dry and wet waste segregation. However, there is still not a law in place regarding plastic segregation and thereby plastic recycling. So what we wanted to do is try and implement, say, a nudge type intervention by giving feedback to households in terms of how much plastic they are recycling. All right. So it was a 5-week program. Week 1 and week 2, we had put at the start of the first week, we had put nice dabbas with labels saying dry waste, wet waste, plastic waste. And we had informed, say we had done a training session with the homeowners and the household. And I remember that training session, which I was a part of. This was in Ghatkopar, which is a predominantly Gujarati neighborhood, and the residents were also primarily Gujarati. And we went in with with instructions for this plastic recycling thing in 3 languages: English, Hindi, Gujarati. And we were narrating all of these things in these 3 multiple languages, etc. And in the middle of this, we were so blindsided by just applying this model of giving feedback to people and then waiting for behavior to change. In the middle, there was a homeowner who looked at someone who was sitting next to her and said in a 4th language, Marathi, "Are you paying attention?"
Yes, sir.
No. The person asked, the homeowner asked the other person, "Are you paying attention?" And in Marathi. And we said, "Oh, damn, we're not targeting the house help. They segregate the waste. We need to have instructions in Marathi. We need to contextualize even more." So I think that experience taught us so much. And the link that I've shared actually in the chat is about how context matters for nudgers as well. So the nudge, yes, of course, needs to be contextualized, but the context matters for the person who's nudging as well as a behavioral scientist. So I think in terms of your question, Siva Prasad, I would recommend you reading that link. That's also written by Anirudh and I, and we were in charge of running that project. And yeah, that taught us a lot.
Sure, thank you. This is, thank you. Also, this is, of course, in Mumbai is a huge city, and there are different cultures and different other factors. But what do you think about the rural context, which is you talked about the social norms and the also the collectivistic attribute and different other factors, which I felt like a strong case. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, for in terms of the potential for nudges.
Absolutely.
Also the morality.
I cannot underestimate how important using choice architecture, using the EAST framework, which is making behavior change easy, attractive, social, and timely. Which is from BIT, the Behavioral Insights team. And Cass Sunstein just added the F in front of EAST and made it feast, that it needs to be fun as well. I cannot underestimate how important it is to develop interventions and develop behavior change practices using that framework, using leveraging on choice architecture, leveraging on the fact that all of us are human beings, and we use heuristics, we use mental shortcuts, we want to do things fast and easy and simple and all of these things. So I definitely think that there's so much potential, especially in India, rural, urban, both.
Maybe my last follow-up question. Can I ask just one more question? I don't want to take too much time. This is we have. In the West, the British Behavioral Insight team, actually they are doing the interventions clearly based on evidence. So every intervention they are accumulating evidence and creating a large evidence base on which they are, it keeps on going. So which is like, so here there are only very few researches and interventions, especially the nudge type interventions, nudge type behavioral interventions. I think very clearly written, one of the very clearly written papers is your paper, which came in 2018. There are others which are part of a group of studies, done in different contexts and put together, but dedicated done in Indian context and clearly analyzing the from within the Indian cultural context is one of the studies is yours. So such studies are very, very rare and very, very less in numbers. So with this evidence base being very, very narrow, will it not obstruct the progress? So what do you think how should it progress?
I think it needs to progress just like by adapting and not just blindly following frameworks that have been contextualized in the West because of the entire half an hour of presentation that I did, because it's very, very important to contextualize an intervention before you actually implement it within the Indian context. That said, there's nothing wrong with relying on evidence from the West, but it is very, very important to contextualize it to the Indian context before it is applied here as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the next one is by Nihal Kapoor. That's a very interesting question. So Nihal, a lot of my creativity research has actually been done with students at IIT Bombay. And those students come from all over the country. So I haven't necessarily looked at an urban-rural divide, to be completely honest. But I definitely think that would be a very, very interesting area of future research, because I don't think that it would be right to say that they are more creative, ingenious in a way, but I definitely think that it's an area that can be considered for future research in terms of urban-rural differences in creative capacities.
We also have a couple of hand raises.
So Anthony, you say that you will be working in the area of gender equality and women's empowerment in the rural community of India. Which of the dimensions to behavioral change has proven to be more positive to behavioral change in India? In terms of, I think I'm not entirely sure of. I understand the area that you're working within, but again, in terms of model foundations, in terms of the cultural dimensions, all of them can be applied. But it really depends on whether you're looking at, say, gender equality to in the context of reducing intimate partner violence. Is it gender equality in the context of access to education? Is it gender equality in the context of financial independence or receiving microfinance loans? Which therefore will be able to get, all of those will be able to get molded within context of behavior change, say principles. But when you're saying dimensions of behavior change, again, it would really depend on the nature of women's empowerment that you could be looking at. I'm sorry, I can't be more helpful. Okay, for the interest of time, I'm going to go on to the last question in the chat, at least. Application of drones for disaster management. One area that we're looking into is community participation, how to get people involved in tech development and application. Wish to share any examples in this regard. Also, how to check other nudges which are anti to our goal. Those are called sludges. A good example of a sludge is the, say, taxation system in any country. It's really difficult to understand all of those forms and do all of that, and therefore you have to pay like someone else to do it who's professional enough to get it done. But a lot of a lot of sludge work in that sense has been done in the context of the US, say the internal revenue system for getting people to file their taxes by making forms simpler and things like that. I actually don't have a lot of examples in terms of disaster management, but when you're talking about community participation, I would definitely, there has been some work that has integrated action research with behavioral principles. So I would encourage you to kind of look at that, because I think that's the intersection of work that you may be looking at applying for your own study. Thanks for that question, Debashish.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the answer.
Christopher, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Just quick background. My own research is looking at gender equality work broadly, specifically how implementations or projects can be improved to maximize the impact. So specifically, my topic is on studying masculinities and how men react to women's empowerment, and to reduce the negative responses that men might have towards women empowerment projects. But really my question, although it is linked to that, is when we were doing the toilet building and the community sanitation projects, we taught a lot of women how to build their own toilets, not because the government wasn't doing a good enough job, although a few years ago when we started, they were a little bit slow. But by the time our project got ramped up, the government's own toilet building project was also going really fast. However, when we were doing our observation visits, we noticed that the women who built their own toilets were using them far more than the people who didn't build their own toilets, who either had them built by government or were built by the women we had trained. And I wonder if that has been a part of your nudge research, is looking into the buy-in, the personal ownership that people have over the project, and how that helps them. You mentioned the champions that you were training, how that has helped shape your work as well.
Thanks for that question, Christopher. It actually ties into behavioral principles of ownership and the endowment effect. So if I've made it, I think in there's a term in psychology as well. Endowment effect is of course an economic term, but it is there was a classic experiment, and the researchers' names escape me right now, but they basically gave half a class mugs. All right, and they gave half the class chocolates, like a bar of chocolate, and it was supposed to be a free trade experiment. So people were allowed to talk to each other and say that, okay, I'm going to pay you X for the mug and for the chocolate, etc. And people who were given their initial endowments as mugs and as chocolates, although they had no real value attached to them, they just preferred to keep the mug and the chocolate and not really trade. So an endowment effect is really is an effect that if I've created or if I already own something, or in my head I have psychological ownership over something, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to prefer that over an alternative. And I think in psychology, I'm not sure whether it's called the generation effect, or there's something where if I've created it, then I prefer it over something else. The term exactly is escaping me, but as soon as I remember it, I will let you know. But it ties in with behavioral principles so well, honestly. That behavior of just wanting to use what you've made versus another alternative.
Yeah, I love that. I think it also might be effective in terms of like a ripple effect, or if you empower one group of people as champions, if you empower one group of people as champions, and what they're looking for, what their goal is to change the larger community. For example, in community sanitation, if only when everybody uses a toilet will the groundwater stop being polluted. So you need everybody to participate. So I think maybe that same ownership could be applied for those local champions, also changing the behavior of the non-participants or like the non-target group, but still part of the community. Do you think that's also useful?
Absolutely. I think it really is. And I think it's, so the generation effect, I just looked it up, is related to if you think of something yourself, you remember it better. So that's a very cognitive thing, but it's called the creation effect, the self-creation effect. So if you've created a product yourself, then you are more likely to consume that product versus, and this could be food related, it could be a latrine, it could be anything at all. But what you've mentioned also absolutely plays in really well to explain that behavior.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I think part of the reason why we took that approach of having women build their own toilets was for the same reason, is that their buy-in is greater when they build it themselves. They built that toilet, but also the reason we wanted them to know in and out how to maintain it, from making the pit, because maintenance, and you stop using it after 5 years because the pit gets filled. And this is something that we had found in a lot of places that where the government had actually built toilets for the people. So we wanted them to know the in and out of the toilet. So anything goes wrong, they know exactly.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So you come?
Plus the fact is that they work as anyway, they work in construction sites.
Thank you, sir.
Do you mind turning your mic off, please? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. I just say you stand this side. No one. Marco. Okay.
I guess he's not really hearing us. Anyway, so for these very reasons we had it, but yeah, it's interesting of the things that we put in for reasons that as we were designing things with them, was kind of how we came about. But yeah, I think maybe you've given material for Chris to write another paper.
I would hope so.
Definitely, the idea of sludge is actually really fascinating.
Yeah,
to just put a name to it.
Yeah, it wasn't mine. I mean, it's I think either Cass Sunstein or Richard Thaler came up with it. But basically, it's to really slow down behavior change is a sludge. It's bad design.
Any other questions? Oh, there's one more.
I have a question, but I don't know if somebody else had their hand raised.
Go ahead, Srividya.
So I'm sorry, ma'am. I actually missed, and really I apologize. I missed most of your talk, and I unfortunately am not familiar with your literature. So my question may be something that you've already talked about, but just in terms of the last question and answer that we talked about, I think that, I mean, it seems like if something like, ownership over, a particular, thing like the toilet, or whether it's like, your own water source or whatever it is that you're trying to sort of nudge behavior towards, seems to be the more effective way to change behavior. I mean, I would imagine that, and this is I think the struggle that we have, at least in doing, action-oriented research, is designing clean enough studies to be able to sort of isolate the change in behavior to that particular nudge intervention, or even if it's just interventions in general. I mean, but how, with the endowment principle that you talked about being such an effective, seeming like an effective way to be able to change behavior. One thing that I personally get a little bit frustrated with is that when we're in the field and we see things working quite well and could be replicated across other locations, to be able to convince policymakers that this is in fact an effective way by producing sound enough research or results that connect that intervention to that behavior change. So I guess it's more of a general question. How do you ensure clean research design in general?
I think there's no short answer to that, honestly. In some cases, it does take an RCT. In other cases, it may be a lab in the field experiment to establish principle, or like to establish proof of concept. But clean research design, when you're conducting, say, a field experiment and things like that, there are things that you can control for. There are other there are things that you can control for post hoc through, I think it's through matching controls, through making sure that your two groups or multiple groups are matched on salient variables, gender distribution, age distribution, things like that. So I definitely think that statistically as well as experimentally, there are multiple controls that you can adopt to ensure that the change in behavior that you are seeing is due to the intervention and not. The easiest and most expensive way to do that is to run a randomized controlled trial. And therefore, I would suggest either looking at that or building skills in that context, or making sure that you can, well, run surveys, or not run surveys, but at least ramp up your own research methodology so that you're in a better place.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Can I also ask a question, or I cannot raise my hand?
Go ahead, sir.
It's okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Is it okay, Hansika? Dr. Hansika, you're okay? Okay.
Sorry, hi. My name is Tur. I come from Israel, mostly from a computational approach to social learning. And I want to share a little bit of a story. I visited Phnom Penh, Cambodia about 15 years ago. And I had a friend who lived there, and he took me over, and we had a little bit of a trip, and went to the villages. And the interesting fact is that Cambodia was, at that time, I'm not updated, was located in the UN index as 184th country in corruption. And I thought that was what I would experience when I get there. But it seems that, well, I had a lovely time. I spoke to local people. A lot of people, most of them were very happy, poor, but happy. Very limited resources, but they were very I felt they were very happy people. And I was wondering, and then it came to my mind that corruption in the Western way we see may sometimes be very different from what is the core values and principles that guide other cultures that are not Western. And the question is, are we taking into account the intervention that goes against core values of the population? Is that taken into consideration in the indexes when you approach some place? I know that India is, your homeland, and you know exactly much more about it, but that just occurred to me that it's not always obvious whether you want to make that behavioral change. If everybody's happy and they're not Western, it doesn't mean that we have to change the way they live their lives happily.
Sure.
So other than that, obviously the lecture is fascinating and the topic is incredible, and we all hope to do good things and improve the lives of everybody.
Sure, and thank you for that question. So behavioral change, choice architecture, nudging has, of course, been accused of paternalistic tendencies, that I'm telling you what to do and you should do it. And I will tell you to eat healthy by changing the design of a buffet and putting healthy things right at the start and putting the desserts right at the back.
Yes, and you
So,
also we're employing tactics to kind of avoid that. We'll, you know, get some people from them to be champions for our change, but they get money for that, and all that stuff is
which is absolutely absolutely relevant. So in case you haven't checked the chat, I would recommend going to that article that we wrote in the Behavioral Scientist, because it talks about exactly what you were saying in terms of how important it is to contextualize an intervention, contextualize a nudge, contextualize behavior change, because not all behavior change has to be framed within the context of what Western notions of good behavior are or is. And therefore, I think it's very, very important to take into account cultural socialization, values, principles, morals, all of these things when you're actually even not just developing an intervention, but even thinking about changing a certain type of behavior. I mean, there could be behaviors that universally should not be done. For instance, intimate partner violence should not be done, regardless of whether you're in India or in the US or wherever it is. It is a basic human right to not be abused domestically. But then there are other more subtle changes, more subtle behaviors that may actually have to be taken into account when you're considering the context. And that's where the sacred nudging paper really comes in, because yeah, okay, you're building toilets, that's fantastic. How are you going to tease apart all of these years and years of caste-based norms and social hierarchies regarding purity and regarding which castes are supposed to clean after which other castes? How are you going to tease that apart without taking that into consideration when developing a behavioral change intervention? So I think it goes both ways, because I wouldn't expect someone from, say, a Western nation, unless they're really invested in obviously studying India, to really understand the intricacies of what goes behind facilitating behavior change here. So I think that needs to be taken into account. Absolutely.
I will absolutely go over the paper. Thank you so much for the answer.
Okay. No problem.
Is there any other questions? I think there's just, I think there's a lot of background chatter, Dr. Hansika, that's going on. I think people are really very interested. There are a lot of things that people have been doing subconsciously, unconsciously, and that they are actually starting to make the connections with your talk. And so I think there will be a lot more questions that they will come. And this is a very interesting, and it's very relevant to everybody who's going into the field. So again, I would really, I know we've gone over our time. I think we said that we asked you if you would spend 2 to 3 with us. We started 10 minutes before and we've got 10 minutes after.
Okay.
But it was a wonderful conversation, and really, as on behalf of Amachi Labs, on behalf of the Center for Women Empowerment, Gender Equality, the University, the E4Life program, all the students at the E4Life program, really thank you so much for your wonderful talk, very insightful comments, and just your presence and the way you held the interest of everybody. I think everybody could relate to what you were speaking. Thank you so much. You've given us a lot, and we deeply appreciate it. And also, also really look forward to doing something together, because there's so much of alignment in what you do and what we do, and we're also constantly conducting these kind of experiments, whether we know it or not. Sometimes deliberately and sometimes not so deliberately, but it's all the time, because we're working around the clock in the villages, and so I think it would be wonderful to work with you on several different topics and very aligned interests.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to everyone at Amrita University, including all the faculty, all the students, and Professor Rao for reaching out to me. My contact is with Professor Rao. I love to collaborate. So in case you would like to do something, hit me up, hit me an email, and we'll take it from there.
And you said you were based in Mumbai, and so okay, so that's also good for us to know. It would be nice if everyone could just briefly turn on their videos and just say to greet Dr. Kapoor and thank her for a wonderful talk. Thank you, everybody. So you can see that there are actually faces behind all those names in those little boxes.
Thank you, Doctor. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you. It's really got me thinking a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you.
Great. I look forward to interacting with you again, Professor Rao. I must jump into my next meeting.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.